If nuclear bombs go flying, doesn't really matter.
This whole thing about fighting a war because your book said it, because your God said it, just seems so insane to me. All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're reacting to this video with Tucker and Professor Jiang. They talk about some really interesting stuff, and I think that the professor makes some really good points here. As you know, he's been all over the media recently because of his predictions in the past about what's going to happen if Donald Trump wins the election and how things are going to play out. And so far, it's played out almost to the T, so he's gained a lot of credibility, but we're going to check some of this out and see what he's talking about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it.
Where is Israel in a few years from now?
So if you look at the main beneficiary of this war, it is Israel, because Israel has an ambition called the Greater Israel Project, which is what they believe that their God, Yahweh, promised to their ancestor, Abraham. And so they believe that Yahweh promised Abraham all the land from the Nile in Egypt to Euphrates in
Yes.
Iraq. If you look at the entire map, it also extends to Anatolia, which is southern Turkey, and even into Saudi Arabia. So if you look at what's happening, well, it's convenient in that the GCC is being destroyed. Saudi Arabia will probably be drawn into this war. It is possible Turkey will be drawn into this war as well. And this war allows Israel to remake the Middle East in its own image. Also, if you think about it, according to game theory, the main constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America, because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain.
That's a really good point. You know, Israel's ability to quote unquote control the Middle East is kind of contingent on us. And I think that's a really solid point that people kind of forget, is that, you know, Israel is trying to become a superpower in its own right. I know it's a small country, but they're very technologically advanced. And I think they're trying to become the next superpower for the Middle East. The same way that we kind of have North and South America on lock, right? Whatever happens in North and South America, the United States is going to be part of it, right? You're not gonna come into these continents and we're not gonna have a say, right? So I think the same way that the U.S. kind of controls North and South America as far as what happens in that region, I think Israel's trying to do the exact same thing, where they become this big superpower that kind of influences and has the reins of everything that goes on in the Middle East.
UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war. And American people don't even understand why America is still in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project.
It was clear to me that that was part of the motive, that Israel understood this and roped the United States into this war in order to get the United States out, in order to hurt the United States and get the United States out of the Middle East. Do you think that will be successful?
I think the way this war is going, this plan will work. And the reason why is the American military has not fought a real war for decades. 2003, this war in Iraq was not a real war because Saddam Hussein basically gave up. He didn't have air defense because those economic sanctions had destroyed his economy. And his logic was this: let the Americans invade. They can't possibly invade because if they destroy us, that would make Iran, which has hostilities against America, the regional power. So why would America do this? It is self-defeating. It is not logical. It is not rational. So I'm not worried about them attacking me. And he was surprised when they did attack because it was not logical. It was not rational. But they did attack. It was a cakewalk. It took about 2 weeks. America achieved air supremacy very quickly, and they rolled into Baghdad very very quickly and topple the regime. So that was a very quick and easy war that fit the American military doctrine of shock and awe. Iran is completely different, and the American military does not want to fight this war because they've war gamed this countless times. And each war game, they discover that they lose because the American military it's too bulky. It's not as nimble and resilient as the Iranian military, and we're seeing that play out right now, where you have these devastating carriers, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald Ford, threatening Iran, but not actually doing anything because they're afraid of getting too close to the coast of Iran, because then they become susceptible to drone strikes as well as hypersonics. So the Iranians have
I might disagree slightly when it comes to his statement about we would lose if we went to war with Iran. I'm talking about all-out war, like boots on the ground, all of our assets fighting a war in Iran. I don't know if we would necessarily lose, but I definitely think that it's a war that nobody wants, right? That's not even a question, really. I think it's a war that's unnecessary. I don't think Americans have the stomach for it. I don't think our troops are interested in going into Iran, right? Because it's all fun and games till you're getting shot at and getting blown up and your buddies are going home in body bags, right? Because we take losses too. So if a war like that broke out where we went boots on the ground, I think a lot of troops would be like, hey man, like what the fuck are we doing? Like this isn't the play here. Afghanistan and Iraq, it's a little different because, post 9/11, we're on a terror, like you said, shock and awe. Those days are done. We're past that, right? Iran hasn't done anything to us to where we take it personal as the American people. We don't really think about them. And to be honest, we're more worried about what's going on in our own country, right? What's happening in the United States? Why don't we have certain things? Why are there so many problems still, right? Why is gas $9 a gallon? Like, these are all things we're worried about as opposed to trying to fight a war in Iran. So I don't know if we would necessarily lose if we went all out, but I definitely think that there is absolutely zero appetite to make a war like this happen.
preparing this for 20 plus years. They know the entire American playbook, and they have the perfect strategy to counter the American playbook. So America will have a really tough time winning this war. The great problem, the big question now is, will America send in ground troops? Because once America sends in ground troops, then it becomes pot committed. It's mission creep, sunk cost fallacy. It'll be like Vietnam all over. So right now there's talk of 2,500 Marines who've coming in from Okinawa. They'll be in the Middle East in about 7 days' time. And the rumor is, and I don't know, but the rumor is the intention is for them to take Karg Island, which is the main oil depot for Iran. So Iran exports 9% of its oil from that facility, the island. And if the Marines were to take it, it would be great optics. Trump would look good on TV. It'd be a great boost for American morale. The problem is that you can take it, but you can't hold it because it's too close to Iranian coast, and the Iranians can attack with artillery, with drones. Which means that you now have to take on the coast. You have to occupy the coast and create a forward operating base. But then you're exposed to the Zagros Mountains, right? Which means that you're now forced to occupy the mountains as well. So it's mission creep. It's exactly like Vietnam, where in 1965.
Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, but I think that the biggest mistake, more so than what we've already done by starting this war, one of the biggest mistakes we could make in this conflict is trying to take that island with the Muse, right? With the Marines to take that island and try to occupy it. I think that would be a disaster. He mentioned that this would look good for Trump potentially, but I think that it exposes us to too much risk, right? And it exposes the administration to too much risk. Could you imagine if we took that island and occupied it for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden Iran starts sending drones onto the island and they kill, 20 Marines in a drone strike, right? Because we don't have any defense out there other than the ships, right? All those, battle carrier groups and stuff like that, those strike carrier groups and those ships out there, yeah, they could defend the island, I guess, but why? What do we achieve by doing that? I don't think that benefits anybody. And if anything, I think the risk is way greater than the reward for taking that island. And I couldn't imagine what we would do or what would happen if we sent a couple thousand troops to that island just to lose 100 troops in a drone strike because a rocket or a drone got through our defense system, right? It would be an absolute disaster. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that'd be a good idea if we took that island?
Um, 3,000 Marines went into Da Nang to occupy an air base, and like 4 or 5 years later, you have a 500,000 troops, right? So it started off as a very limited, self-defined mission, but then it just balloons. So America could find itself in the situation very quickly.
If you were the commander in chief of the United States, what would you do at this point as of today?
Commander-in-chief meaning Donald Trump?
Yeah. You get to make the decisions.
Or
What does America do next if it's acting in its own interest, if it's trying to preserve its power and wealth at this point? What does it do?
Well, first of all, I would acknowledge that all these events are interconnected, right? So this trade war with China, this war in Ukraine, this war in the Middle East, it's all interconnected because the American empire is too overstretched and it has its fingers on everything. And so it allows its enemies to provoke it into these never-ending wars. So what I would do is basically sit down everyone, okay, including Russia, China, Iran, and say, it's time for a new world order where we are partners in this relationship, right? Before America was the hegemon, before the US dollar was the world reserve currency. But now what we want to do is open a dialogue where everyone is respected, where America is no longer the bully, but a willing partner in creating a new economic order that benefits everyone and not just a few.
Well, that's a really good take, and it's really interesting. I think a lot of Americans would be okay with that, to be honest. I mean, I personally would, right? Look, I get it. You know, it's nice to be the big guy in the room. It's nice to be the strongest one in the room, but I'm more worried about American longevity rather than being the biggest guy in the room, you know? I don't think it's cool that we get to bully all these other countries just because we have the biggest guns and biggest rockets. And I don't think it's necessary anymore. I think those days are done, you know? A lot of veterans were tired of the endless wars, you know, me included. You know, I served, I went overseas, I did the whole shebang. And I just don't see it. I don't see what the benefit is of us constantly beefing and warring and constant conflict, right? Using these proxy groups to fight wars for us, right? These proxy wars, as you will. I just don't see the benefit of it anymore, you know? And if that means we lose a little bit of power on the world stage, but we're able to take care of the issues on the mainland, take care of the issues in America itself, I think that's okay. I think that's fine. I don't think we have to grasp for straws, so to speak. I don't think we have to keep exerting power around the globe. I think we need to focus on having alliances like NATO. I think NATO was a net positive for us to ensure security for our nation. And then once we have those alliances such as NATO, we can scale it back a little bit. You know, we could take our time and focus on the things that matter for the American people, like all the issues that are happening here on the home front.
I think that's the wisest possible advice and probably the only path that preserves civilization. But the one country standing in the way of that is Israel, which is the only beneficiary of this war, as you just said. I think that's true. Can you think of another beneficiary other than Israel of this war?
Well, Russia benefits, right? Because Russia's trying to win this war in Ukraine.
That's correct.
And America is forced to lift oil sanctions. And so now Russia is now able to take all these war profits, right? And then help the Iranians, finance the Iranians in the struggle against the Americans and Israelis. So the Russians also benefit tremendously from this war.
Yeah, but fair point. Israel has to be constrained by the United States in order to do what you just recommended it do. Is that possible? Does the American president have the authority to control its client state?
So if you look at the domestic situation in Israel, Israel no longer behaves rationally. It is sort of overtaken by eschatological fever, right? So if you look at videos coming out of Israel, there are rabbis going around saying that this war in the Middle East, even though it's destroying Tel Aviv, it's good for us because this will lead to the coming of our Messiah. So they believe that it is when Israel is under the most strain, when when the very existence of Israel is threatened, then God will intervene because the Jewish people will come together as a nation again and commit themselves, renew their faith in God. And once God sees the blind, trusting, absolute faith of the Jewish people, then he will save his people by sending his Messiah, who will then redeem the Jewish people. So another saying this is secular temporal matters don't really matter. This war in the Middle East, not an issue. What matters is divinity. What matters is our relationship with God.
Yes.
So what matters is faith. If nuclear bombs go flying, doesn't really matter.
I'll say it again and again. I think religious wars and wars based off of religious beliefs are some of the most dangerous events that could happen, especially in the modern day, right? Wars that happen because of a religion or because of religious beliefs are catastrophically worse than a war that happens because you just disagree with each other, you know? I think the reason for that is because you never find an end. Like, you can't really ever find an end to it. You know, even if these guys made peace, I feel like because of their religions colliding with each other, give it 20 years, give it 30 years, give it 60 years, and they'll be fighting again. It's like this whole thing about fighting a war because your book said it, because your God said it, just seems so insane to me. I don't know if you guys disagree. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a bad take, but I just feel like every time we look at a war and there's some religious aspect to it, it just seems so much worse because there's no end in sight. I feel like there's no resolution that can be made.
It's what's so interesting is that, 25 years ago at 9/11, whatever you think of how that happened and why, there was, I saw it personally, a political Islam. There were Wahhabists. There were a lot of Islamic radicals around the world. And for a bunch of reasons over 25 years, that hasn't disappeared. There still exist Islamic radicals, but it's not, an important political force anymore. At the same time, as Islam in general has become much more moderate, and the GCC is kind of the most obvious example of this, there has been a rise of Jewish Wahhabism and evangelical Christian Wahhabism, so to speak. I mean, you've seen this eschatological extremism among some American Protestants, Christians, and some Israeli and American Jews. How did that happen? What is that?
Right. So first of all, I don't think we can ever overestimate the influence of eschatology in American politics.
Exactly.
So I'll give an example where about a quarter of Americans are evangelicals, and a lot of them are Christian Zionists. So they believe that Israel is crucial, the linchpin to achieving God's plan and the return of Jesus. And so a very prominent figure that you probably know very well is John Hagee, who runs something called the Christians United for Israel. It's 7 million members. And these are the people who are financing a lot of the conflict in the Middle East, in Israel, because they're the ones who are funding West Bank settlements. And so Christian Zionism, it is an extremely powerful political force in America. So your question is, how did this happen? And
Yes.
the issue is that this is a plan that has been in motion for centuries, and it's a very complicated history, but it involves different religious groups among the Jews, Septim Francus, Shabbat Lubavitch, which you've talked about, but also it involves the Freemasons, the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians. It involves the Jesuits. So you have these different secret societies, different religious organizations working together through the centuries to achieve this plan for the end of the world, which heralds the Messianic age, okay? And there are different components of this plan, but the basic components are, one is the creation of the nation state of Israel, which happened in 1948. And then you need to have the building of the third temple, which requires the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is actually which could happen during this war, given what we've seen so far. So the Israelis have closed off the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as other religious sites like the Church of Holy Sepulchre, to tourists these past few days. There's rumors that for the past 2 years, the Israelis have been conducting these archaeological digs under the Al-Aqsa Mosque to basically destroy the foundations of the mosque, so that they can conduct a controlled demolition of the mosque and blame it on a missile strike from the Iranians. And there's actually talk among the Israelis of using this plan to ignite a war between the Arabs and the Persians. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque needs to be destroyed for the third temple. They also talk about this war of Gog and Magog between Israel and the entire world. Then the coming of the Jewish Messiah, the creation of the Greater Israel Project, the return of all Jews from the diaspora. So there are different components to this plan. If you just observe geopolitical events, we're seeing these events converge together today. I mean, all these events are playing out. So it seems as though there are these very powerful shadow forces working behind the scenes. We don't know who they are, but it seems as though they're able to control geopolitics in a certain manner as to fulfill their eschatological script.
Yeah, I think we're going to stop there. He said a lot there. That's kind of a lot to take in and process. I can't really speak too much to, the back of the house, behind the scenes kind of stuff, because that's not really my field. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just a guy who yaps, but he makes a lot of interesting points. I will say some things I do kind of wish I had more context on, because I don't necessarily agree with him, but I do like to hear differing opinions so I can kind of make an opinion of my own, right? Which I'm sure a lot of you guys are the same way. But I think this guy, Professor Jiang, I think he has a lot of insight. I think he's well studied. And I think that he makes a lot of solid points that most people could get behind once they understand the context of it. And I'm really glad that Tucker interviewed him so we could hear his perspective. But thanks for watching, guys. If you stuck around to the end here, consider liking and subscribing. I'm trying to grow this channel, trying to grow a community here. And, I'll keep you guys posted. And I should be posting another video pretty soon here. I want to be pretty active. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Give me your opinions on this stuff. And I'll see you guys in another video, man. Be good. Take it easy.